hopefully my technology does not poop out on us tonight. Hi, so welcome to our night school for this week. Thanks all for coming out. You know, one of the reasons, one way I have thinking about why we do night school, why political education matters, why we do more in DSA than knock on doors, is fundamentally that political education ideally is a space where socialists come together to clarify our values, what we stand for, why we stand for it, to talk about and discuss and debate and think through our strategy. So how best we can focus our limited time and resources in order to achieve our ends, which is, you know, transforming the world. So to clarify our values, to talk through our strategy, and then to kind of direct ourselves towards action, to you know, analyze and look at the actions going on and what we might do given our strategy and our overall values, how we want to see the world transform. So I think political education is a special space to do that. Another way of thinking about it is just that in DSA, we, I think, value active socialists. Like, you better be knocking on doors or doing something like it if you're a DSA member, but also we want to be smart socialists, and we value socialists who take the time to discuss together what being a socialist means and how to achieve what we want to achieve. So that, I think, is why political education matters and why I'm so excited to see everybody here tonight. Then just a little bit about night school. Night school is a 2-semester program where in the first semester, which you're in the midst of, we do sessions on sort of the big ideas of socialism in America today, including sort of why be a socialist in the first place, which we had a session with Nathan Robinson, the analysis of the capitalist economy, socialists and elections in the state today, the labor movement, which we have with Jane McAlevey next week, as well as race, gender, and social movements. So that's semester 1, and then semester 2, we kind of hone in a little more on the programmatic aspects of today's socialist program, including Medicare for All, Green New Deal, housing for all, ending mass incarceration, etc. All are welcome, and you know, the way, just so you have a sense of how today's session works, we have an amazing presentation today, and I'll introduce our speakers in a minute. We start with a presentation, usually for about 30 to 40 minutes. Then we have time for Q&A for the speakers. That can be about what they said. It can be about something you found confusing or interesting in the readings. It can be about just questions more generally you have about how socialists orient towards the state and electoral politics today. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A for the speakers, and then we break out into smaller groups to have kind of closer discussion, give everybody a chance to speak and to meet each other and to hash through some of these ideas together. And then we'll come back and report back to each other some of the key ideas that came up in our discussion. So that's more or less how it works tonight. And again, really appreciate all being here. I'm going to hand the baton then off to our speakers for the evening. Briefly, just to introduce them both, Daniel Cheng and Ansley Pentz are amazing, wonderful, and brilliant electoral organizers in our New York City DSA. Daniel is in Lower Manhattan, and Ansley is here in North Brooklyn. You may have seen them around, and tonight they're going to be talking about sort of how socialists think about the state, the capitalist state, how we as socialists are developing our thinking about elections, what it means to be a socialist and to do elections, and what we in the American left especially try to do when we have no kind of party as an organization. What kind of organization is DSA, and what are we trying to create that can ultimately allow us to wield power and achieve our socialist goals? So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Daniel.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? Cool. I can start sharing my screen. Okay, so I'm going to start off here talking about just the Marxist theory of the capitalist state. So why is this super important? So, as you know, we're very involved in elections. We're involved in building our presence in the state. We have a lot of legislative goals like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal that will go through the state. And so I think having a general understanding of what the state is and what its orientation is extremely important and foundational for our understanding of how we develop political strategy and how to move forward. So we're going to start off with the bad news. I don't know if you've noticed, but the state tends to be more in favor of capitalists than of us. Probably noticed that. But let's get into a little more detail about why that is. So there are three primary mechanisms by which capitalists influence the state and influence state managers, like political state managers. Who's Andrew Cheng? Sorry, I'm seeing someone drawing stuff on my slides. Anyways, so I'm sorry, I accidentally a wrong button. Technical issues. Okay, sorry about that. So getting back to it. So how do capitalists influence the state? So the first mechanism is what we call the interpersonal mechanism. So the interpersonal mechanism is very intuitive. It's, a lot of state managers are capitalists. They are friends with capitalists. They all hang out at the Harvard Club, stuff like that. They're like ideologically bonded to capitalists. It's their interest because they are capitalists. And that's why they end up doing all these pro-business policies, why they end up being so hostile to socialism and so hostile to workers. It's because of their interpersonal relationships and who they are. And the second one is what we call the institutional mechanism of influence. So institutional also is something I think fairly intuitive. It's because, in order to get into the state itself, it requires all of these resources, and staying there also requires all of these resources that are ultimately provided by capitalists, right? So, we all know the understanding of how all these candidates, they typically go to all these corporations, super PACs, whatever, in order to win their elections. They take a lot of real estate money, corporate donations, et cetera, et cetera. And because of that reason, when some big, let's say, housing policy, cancel rent, vote comes up, they call up, Cuomo or whoever else, like Blackstone or whoever calls up Cuomo, and there's like, this is bad, don't cancel rent. And he's like, okay, thank you. That is the institutional mechanism by which capitalists influence the state. So these are forms of direct influence. And so what we call the instrumental influence that capitalists have over the state. So by instrument, I mean it's a very direct form where capitalists are literally giving barking orders and direct orders to the state. They're telling them what to do. It's as if the state is like an arm of the capitalist class. And you see this in Marx himself a lot when he talks about how the state is the executive committee of the bourgeoisie, et cetera, et cetera. It's this understanding that all the state does is represent capitalists, and there's really nothing else to it than that. But there's actually a third mode of influence that is added upon to all of these things. So, like we've seen situations in which you have working class candidates, you see places that have really strong campaign finance laws, which means there's less money in politics. But still, most of these states, for the most part, orient themselves towards the capitalist class. And why is that? Well, it's because this third mechanism is investment. So under capitalism, capitalists control the means of production and they control investment. So what that basically means is that they hold the reins for the entire economy. So if you just look at the way this flow chart works, you start off with private investment from capitalists. Because they invest, you have economic growth. Through this growth, you have jobs because all these capitalists are hiring people. And, because you have jobs and all of this economic growth, the state gets tax revenue. And it's because they have this tax revenue that they can do things like fund Medicare for All or the Green New Deal. But what happens when capitalists don't like what state managers are doing? Well, you lose the private investment. And because you lose the private investment, you lose the economic growth. You see negative GDP growth. You see a depression or a recession. A bunch of people get laid off. And the state has no tax revenue. They hit a budget shortfall. So basically when capitalists see something they don't like, when they see Medicare for all, they pull back because they don't think this is a good business climate for them. Like if you'll read this, you'll read this in the business news all the time. It's happened a lot after 2008. Is this a good business climate? Is this current climate, and is the current president or Congress amenable to the needs of business? And when they feel like they're not, they do this. They shut down the economy. And ironically, Bernie or whoever who comes in to power specifically on a platform that's meant to challenge the capitalist class end up failing because the capitalists tank their economy and delegitimize the socialist project. And they do so in a couple ways. There's just disinvestment, which is the most common one, is just that capitalists don't like what's going on. So they make the individual decision to disinvest for their own company. You have coordinated capital strikes, where capitalists actually get together and decide not to invest together and make explicit demands on the state. That was very important and very much affected the way Obama governed. Or you have capital flight, where they're like, okay, so I don't like what's going on here in the United States. It's not a friendly government to us. I'm going to go over to some other country where there's better profit to be made. And regardless of which one of those mechanisms you use, like this is still what happens. Capitalists can control or influence the state indirectly by controlling investment and by really holding the reins of the economy. And so, even when you have, state managers who are obviously completely captured by capital, or capitalists themselves, like this is always an underlying logic that informs the way state managers make decisions. So, to use a quote from our dear governor, Amazon Cuomo, talking about how his thoughts on the failure of the Amazon deal, which was really sweet. If any of you remember that a couple years ago. So let's look at this quote. Let's do a close read. Amazon chose to come to New York because we are the capital of the world and the best place to do business. We competed in and won the most hotly contested national economic development competition in the United States, resulting in at least 25,000 to 40,000 good paying jobs for our state and nearly $30 billion in new revenue to fund transit improvements, new housing, schools, and countless of other quality of life improvements. So look at the way that exactly corresponds to the flowchart, right? The best place to do business, private investment, a good business climate. Economic development, economic growth, good paying jobs, new revenue, tax revenue. So, even in this example, this is something state managers always have to worry about, regardless of whether or not they're, they're conservatives or whether or not they're liberals or progressives or socialists themselves. This is a fundamental mechanism that, always, state managers always have to keep in mind, that always affects the way they pass policies and what they end up supporting. And I'm just going to add here this article that Richard Lackman wrote, the way, Amazon did weaponize this. If you look at actually some of the conversations that happened afterwards, what the message they tried to send when they pulled back was like, look, you have to get your activists and whatever, you have to handle them, because if you're not going to handle them, then we're not willing to invest. We're not going to do this for you. We're not going to give you a bunch of good paying jobs by investing. Moving on. So that all sounds really, right? So it really sounds like, screw it. Let's not do anything with the state or elections or anything. I'm going to go build a revolutionary commune where I'm going to grow garbanzo beans, right? That's also an option. But I don't think it's a very good option because, there are still things we can do about the state, right? The state isn't completely captured by capitalists in that way. So what do we do about it? How can we do something about it? So I really want to focus here on the relative autonomy of the state. So, in the interpersonal, any institutional forms of influence, that is not relative autonomy. That's direct control over the state. State has no autonomy over capitalists. But the structural influence has some bend to it. The influence that capital has over the state is indirect, right? You don't need capitalists calling up state managers or interacting with them in any way for the state's decisions to be influenced by capitalists, right? It happens because they're just generally worried about the state of the economy. And it's really within the space of autonomy, the fact that state managers don't just take direct orders from capitalists, that allow us to get our demands and win them. So how do we get them to do that? So the first thing we can do is we can either beat them in primaries or the general election or whatever, Or we can just use the threat itself, right? So, imagine that earlier scenario where, you go up to some politician and they're like, well, if I do this policy, the capitalists aren't going to like that. So, and if they do that, they're going to pull their investment, we're going to lose growth and jobs, and it's going to be really bad for me, and I'm going to lose office because everyone's going to be pissed off at me. Instead, what we do here is we say, well, like, fuck you. If you don't do what we say, if you don't do what we want, then we can guarantee that you're going to lose your job anyways, because we're going to get somebody else into office and we're going to beat you in an election. So that's one way we do it, right? And that's a really important way. And there's also a second really important way that we do this, which is using class struggle and using activism to change the preferences of the capitalist class to begrudgingly support our demands, to make it so that they see our demands and they're willing to handle our demands, and not disinvest when we make our demands and when we get what we want. So I'm just going to use an example here of the New Deal. New Deal, I think, is a really good example for this. So, a lot of the ways the New Deal is taught in school and stuff like that is that, there's this big depression thing and it really sucked and no one knew what to do about it. And then FDR came in 1932 and he's like, I'm going to have a deal and it's new and it's going to be really great. And FDR was just really sweet and really smart. And he did the thing and then we're out of the depression, right? That's not really it. It's a little more complicated than that. So if you look at FDR's biography, he's not like Bernie. He doesn't have this long history of, being, committed to a working class, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't really have that drive in him the way, someone like Bernie did. And, he didn't really quite come in on that platform either. That wasn't exactly what he was running on when he beat Hoover in 1932. But, what happened there? Why did he end up kind of becoming this mouthpiece for the working class so much that, Bernie was like, I'm the new FDR, right? Well, here's the story. So initially, when the New Deal and a lot of New Deal policy proposals were put forward, there's universal capitalist opposition to them. The entirety of the capitalist class said, no way, I'm not willing to do this, screw this, this would be terrible for business, no thank you. But, over the course of the 30s, you saw a huge wave of militancy, probably the biggest ever in the United States, from organized labor, from unions, from the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, that were disrupting the production process, being out there in the streets, putting pressure out there on capitalists, in order that they felt like they had to do something about it. They were like, we have to give something to these people, because if they continue to disrupt the production process, then they're going to disrupt our profit making. So we need to find a solution to this. So there ended up being a split in the capitalist class, where part of the capitalist class ended up assenting to the New Deal, again, because of all the push that came from labor, from the Communist Party and the Socialist Party. So what was that split on? Largely speaking, you can divide this into two sections. There's the capital-intensive sectors and capital-intensive firms and labor-intensive firms. So just to use a basic example, imagine you're a capital-intensive firm. What that basically means is that you rely more on your machines and your capital for your production than labor, right? So let's say wages are 20% of your firm's total costs. The demand the unions are making, or whoever, is a 10% increase in wages. 10% of 20% is a 2% increase in total costs. You don't want to do it, but you live with it. A labor-intensive firm, for example, that really relies on laborers and not really so much as machines, let's say they're 70% of their total costs. And it's the same demand, right? Same demand about, I want a 10% increase in wages. Well, 10% of 70% is 7% increase in total costs. Now that's a lot, that can seriously put you out of business. So you're going to be much more opposed to that. The labor intensive firms are going to be much more opposed to that same demand than the capital intensive firms are. So essentially what you saw in the New Deal is exactly this split between capital intensive firms and labor intensive firms. Capital-intensive firms were capable of swallowing the costs of the New Deal, while for labor-intensive firms, this was an existential threat, and they weren't willing to. So essentially what happened is FDR then, having a efficient base of support in labor and within capital from these capital-intensive firms who basically said, it's okay, we won't disinvest, fine, we'll do it, was able to then push forward the New Deal against the wishes of labor-intensive firms without triggering a capital strike. And those labor-intensive firms are absolutely right in their concerns, because a lot of them did basically get run to the ground and went out of business. Okay, so what does this mean for us today and socialist strategy? So, I think the way we can kind of conceptualize the state and the restrictions on it is like this in this diagram that I very hastily drew here. So you have the state here in the middle, and each of these kind of backstrain what it's capable of doing. So you have the interpersonal again, which is just like state managers being capitalists, being friends with capitalists. You have institutional, which is them relying on big money donations and all these other forms of resources that are provided by capitalists. And then you have the last, which is investment, the structural one, which I've been talking about this whole time. So what do we do then? How does this inform our strategy? Well, from this, what we learned then is that we have to build a party surrogate that has instrumental autonomy from capitalists in order to make structural reforms. So again, instrumental autonomy includes interpersonal and institutional, right? It's where the capitalists make direct demands on the state. So how do we get over the interpersonal barrier? Well, that's pretty easy. You run working class candidates who are committed to democratic socialism, right? People who aren't bought into capitalism and aren't hanging out in the Harvard Club or whatever. For the institutional one, how do you overcome that? Well, you create your own resource base of volunteers and fundraising, so candidates don't have to rely on capitalist resources. And this is what we've been doing, right? This is why we tell candidates, you're not allowed to take real estate donations, but that's okay because we'll raise a bunch of money from you. We'll raise a bunch of money for you doing like cool parties and whatever, and we'll bring out a huge field team that will go knock on doors and make sure that you can win without having to, listen to what these real estate companies or whatever are telling you. And so when you have that kind of instrumental autonomy, when you're able to, make that space for the state and for state managers, you can begin enacting structural reforms that actually get at the root of the problem. Again, the root of the problem being that the root of the problem being that private investment dictates how the economy goes and that limits what the state is able to do. So you enact reforms that take investment decisions that under capitalism are private, that are determined by capitalists, and then you put them in public hands, which is why things like nationalization is so important. Like if we nationalized the banks in 2009, 2000 crisis, that would have been a huge deal, right? Like, because otherwise, right now, finance firms can be like, screw it, we're not going to lend, Bernie, these policies suck. Whereas if they're controlled by the state, you don't have to worry about that. This is why things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, things that decommodify, that take things off the market, are so important. So, the way you can conceptualize this then is, we're basically trying to knock out these interpersonal and institutional barriers in order to kind of expand the boundaries of what the state can do by moving out this last fence that is the investment and the structural barrier. The thing is, though, as long as you're in capitalism, that barrier, the one on the outside, is always going to exist. And the question of how you get outside of that is, I think, a trickier one that isn't quite addressed here. And yeah, I guess, just to end, I'm sure, a lot of you didn't get a chance to do all the reading, and especially, Dustin Guastella's and Jerry Abbott's article. It was really long, it's like 60 pages, I understand, but I just have to say that, in terms of, especially, I think this part at the end, how this informs our strategy, their discussion on the Democratic Party, the shifting base of the shifting U.S. electorate over the last couple decades, and their general prescription of what it means to build a party surrogate that has instrumental autonomy. I personally think it's totally unparalleled. It's necessarily reading. Out of everything that's come out of this post-2016 Bernie left, I think it's by far the best stuff that's come out on electoral strategy. So that's very much informed what you see here on this slide, and I think everyone should go out and read it if you haven't yet. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And now I will hand it over to Ansley. Thanks again.
Hello, everyone. Just give me 1 second. I'm putting my slideshow on present mode and trying to get you to be just a little bit tinier on my screen so that I can see. I am so excited to be talking to my own branch today. I think that Daniel gave such a good presentation to give context for what we do about the state, how we interact with the state, and what it means for socialists to participate in elections and electoral campaigns. So just an introduction, my name is Ansley, my pronouns are she, her, and I live in Bushwick. I am a member of the Brooklyn Electoral Working Group, which is a self-selected body of New York City DSA. We launch, support, and run campaigns for elected office. And if you go down to this link at the bottom, you can join the Brooklyn Electoral Working Group, which would be your home base in North Brooklyn for electoral work. So why socialists participate in electoral work? I'm going to talk about New York City DSA specifically through a lot of this because I think that that's going to be the most useful for all of you. We participate in class struggle elections because we know that when we win, our legislators are able to improve people's material conditions, and then they also have a bully pulpit for socialism. They're able to speak about socialism, push our demands, and really frame what we're hoping for and what we're fighting for. By running these campaigns, we're able to grow our organization, train our members as organizers and leaders, and directly reach our communities. That organizational piece of it is hugely important and something that we'll get into a little bit later. All right, so backing up a little bit, and I think that Dan really hit on a lot of this stuff, but I just want to give you a couple of reminders from the reading. The government is controlled by the wealthy. People understand this. It's something that if you pull a group of people, like is mentioned in the reading, they understand that the government is not controlled by the working class. That's pretty basic to us, but the reasons for why maybe aren't. So we have to think about how it's easier for the wealthy to get into office. We know that they influence people when they're in office. And also, as Dan really mentioned, this last point, the state's dependence on capital ensures that politicians will favor capitalists, even if the first two mechanisms fail. So what does all of that mean? It means that politicians' choices aren't just shaped by where they come from. It's not just shaped by if you come from a working class background, but it's also about where you're trying to get to and what you're hoping for in the office. This brings up the point, why do we even participate in elections at all? Are all politicians corrupt? My answer to that is maybe, but DSA candidates are something different. Our candidates are of, but they're also for the working class, and they use their candidacy to organize. If they are elected, they're able to advance class struggle by making it clear that the interests of capitalists, their politicians, and their parties are opposed to the interests of everyday people. So they can really frame those issues of class struggle really clearly for everyday people who are able to see them, in the news, see them in their communities, interact with their offices, etc. And the campaigns function really the same way, right? We meet people where they're at, we talk to them at their doors, and we're able to create these really clear differentiations to say, oh, like, do you have healthcare? Oh no, like, why is that? We're able to agitate along those lines, and then we're able to show them something that they can do about it, that all of these working class people can do. They can vote, but then they can also do other things to organize toward change. And that's really what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I really do want to hit on that point, that as cool and wonderful as our working class candidates are, it's not just that they are working class people, and that's why we are able to interact with them. It's because we are using their influence to gain power, and they're also depending on us because we, as organized socialists in DSA, are able to pressure them into really relying on us for resources. So this power dynamic is really important. It works both ways here, and it's something that, even though Jabari is our comrade and our friend, we also want to be able to put political pressure on him when he's in office so that he's held accountable to the movement, and same for everybody else. All right, so fighting for the issues. One of the reasons that we elect socialists seems pretty obvious. I think most people understand this. It's because they can change our material conditions, right? They can fight for the New York Health Act and say, you deserve universal health care, and we're going to really fight to make sure that you get it. Obviously, as we had a really exciting win in New York City recently, where we had a sweep of our state candidates, winning their elections and heading to Albany, or they will head to Albany soon next year. And that's really exciting. That means that we have this real ability to make sure that we pass good cause eviction, that we pass the New York Health Act. That's going to be really instrumental there. They're also able, though, to support, to support, reinforce, and popularize working class demands. So with Julia, for example, even though she didn't win every single rent reform bill that she put forth and was signing on to, back in 2019, she didn't get good cause. That was something that she was fighting for and that DSA was fighting for, that we were organizing for together as comrades. Even though that didn't happen, she was able to, through her office, and we were able to, as DSA, build a lot of support for good cause eviction, and also tell people that, like, your landlord shouldn't evict you without just cause. Everybody deserves a home. Here's why, et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of housing fight is going to outlast just that one vote down on the bill, and hopefully it can get passed later. But I do want to say that, we're not just looking for some progressive change. A lot of people could offer that, right? That could be the difference between, like, Elizabeth Warren, for example, and Bernie Sanders. Like, Warren could say, that she's going to put forward some progressive legislation, and has in a lot of ways. But that's not all that we are after in DSA. We really want to build the socialist movement. DSA candidates, sorry that I keep on hitting my keyboard, but DSA candidates are using their visibility, their campaigns, and, if elected, their offices to build support for socialist politics and policies. So we're building this support, and then we're organizing people into our movement. Our volunteers and our members are connecting with their communities. Right up here in North Brooklyn, we did that through the Julia Salazar campaign, for example, about our socialist platform planks. We're talking to people exactly where they're at, at their doors, on the phones. Voting and elections, we recognize in DSA, I think really rightly, that they are sometimes the most accessible form of political participation for a lot of people. And that's okay. Do we see that as, like, the end goal? Absolutely not. You should not just be voting, but it is a really great way to start a conversation with someone and to say, like, hey, that this election is coming up. This is the time to get organized and to join, our movement. Here's, like, this first thing you can do, and then we'll continue this conversation later on. All right, so growing DSA, another really important piece of our political project. Our DSA campaigns provide clear and accessible opportunities for people to come in and practice communicating our socialist politics. So if you have ever knocked on a door before and somebody's asking you, why do you care so much about this? Or what is this person going to do for me? That's your opportunity to be then clarifying your own politics, right? Meeting working people where they're at, saying what you as a working person believe and why you believe it. That's really powerful. It teaches you a lot of organizing skills, and you'll use those in electoral politics, sure, but you'll use them in other pieces of DSA. You'll use them in your workplaces, especially. You may use them in tenant organizing, etc. The structure of our electoral campaigns creates a lot of opportunities for people to become these organizers and leaders. And we grow DSA. We bring in new members. It's both through people who maybe have been friendly to our politics before, and then finally start seeing, posters up in their communities, Farah, for example, and then are like, oh man, I think that now's the time that I can do a small thing for something that I believe in. But also it could be that you phone bank someone, and they learn about DSA through that way, and they're like, man, these crazy kids are spending their Thursday nights calling me. Like, what is this about? Why is it so important? So I want to shift here to what mainstream electoral campaigns look like, because it's really easy, I think, to get into the trap of thinking that every campaign is like a DSA campaign, but it is not. Our balance of power in campaigns in a traditional electoral model is that an organization may endorse a candidate, and then they send volunteers and resources to the campaign to use as the campaign sees fit. So this could be like a lot of nonprofit organizations. They send some volunteers over, usually not as many as DSA has, and the campaign really has a lot of control to decide what work the volunteers are doing, what they say when they talk to voters or the press. The decisions about strategy and process really are held by the campaign staff and consultants. It's not a really democratic sort of relationship, and the candidate gets all of the experience and connections and data that result from this kind of campaigning, but the organization and the volunteers get nothing. After the election, maybe the candidate wins. Then they now could wield the powers of their elected office to advance the goals of the organization, the nonprofit, or whatever you have. But the problem is that, like, they may not do that. There's no mechanism of accountability. It's just like this weird bit of trust that doesn't have a whole lot of payoff and reward, especially if you can't send, tons and tons of money to candidates. It's easier, say, for maybe like Con Ed to wield power if they're donating, if their execs are donating to a lot of candidates, but it's harder for some like scrappy nonprofit even to be able to wield that power. When they haven't been giving money, they just gave some volunteers sometimes, but not in a way where they were like deeply involved as more than a body in a room. So you could be granted some access to ask for favors, maybe not. If the candidate loses the election, then nobody gets anything. All the volunteers and the relationships and data are just scattered in the winds. So that sucks. And in DSA, we don't believe in that. We believe in a DSA electoral campaign model. So DSA's relationship to endorsed campaigns is completely different. We don't just send volunteers to campaigns. Instead, we believe in organizing our members, and the members part is really important. We believe in organizing people who have paid dues, people who are invested in this work outside of just the election cycle, but really invested in socialism. We organize these people on behalf of the endorsed campaigns. Campaign volunteers are kept and brought into DSA's organizing circles. Staff are often dedicated DSA members whose interests go beyond winning an individual campaign. And these are people who are invested in our movement. Cannot stress that enough. And then also we have this democratic decision making, right? That goes beyond our organization. It goes into the campaign itself. And there are many ways in which we organize with a campaign. We run their comms, we handle their data. All of that is super, super useful. But the biggest thing that I really want to stress here in this room is that we center field when we're connecting with the working class, because we realize that that's the way that we connect with people, right? That's the way that we, get to their houses, get to their phones, and we are able to talk to them about socialism and meet them where they're at. So we have really found in DSA, and I think that organized socialists in general would tell you that this is a good method of organizing, that when you talk to your neighbors one-on-one about their material conditions, it's really effective in getting people to feel some sort of hope and excitement for a new future, and be mobilized and organized to work toward that goal. So, a lot of times we're meeting people who are very apathetic, and you are really trying to battle this apathy that they have because they've seen their politicians continually fail them, and to just be like, well, let me tell you, Jabari is different, is like not very effective, because what does that mean? What kind of promise is that? But instead, when you say like, well, listen, I hear you. I'm a working class person too, and this candidate is our best hope to have universal health care. But you and I, sir, we're going to hold them accountable together because I'm in this organization, DSA, and we are really working closely with Jabari to make sure that like he does not falter on healthcare. And then I would love for you to help me do that too, right? Like if he fails us, we vote him out. We're not going to put somebody in there who's held to these like ulterior interests. And then obviously our candidates not taking money from those interests, like real estate and health insurance companies. All of that really helps too. All right. So it is really important that we're good at winning, but I also want to stress the importance of campaigns. We participate in electoral work because the work that we're doing presents us with an opportunity to organize the working class and bring more people into our movement. That happens during campaigns, but ideally candidates are running campaigns when they're in office too. So the win is important, but as I mentioned before, we're not just looking to improve people's material conditions. We really do see electoral work as one prong in this wheel of things that are going to move us towards socialism. And so we do need that power from the state, but we also have to recognize that it's not the only way that people can be organized, right? You can't just be electing people as a democratic club. Instead, you really need to be bringing them into a movement so that they know where the next place to go is, right? So that they can really organize within their workplaces especially, but also in their housing, organize for specific issues, etc. And once we have people in office, I do think that there's this extra opportunity there for them to be this bully pulpit for socialism, so that they really can share our politics, share what we're fighting for, and then also, like in that same vein of us, organizing in our workplaces as DSA members, or organizing in our housing, our candidates can share those values as well and amplify them. Really quickly, our endorsement process for this cycle is in its middle stages. So I just want to go over it for all of you here. NYC DSA endorses candidates, but we don't do it in a traditional way, in the same way that we don't run campaigns in a traditional way. We have a really long and intense democratic endorsement process that's built on a mutual commitment to building durable working class power. And that means that candidates are coming to us as proud socialists. They are really showing that they're aligned with our values and committed to building DSA. And we make those campaigns meaningful because we run them, and we have a lot of skills and expertise, but we also have a lot of grit and determination, and that makes these electoral efforts really successful. Right now, we have gone through in Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Electoral Working Group has recommended a couple of candidates to our branches to be considered for endorsement. In North Brooklyn, we are not hearing from any candidates, I believe, at our meeting next month, but we will still be talking about what it means to participate in electoral work. So I hope that you will continue that conversation at the branch meeting. It should be really interesting to see how we interact with the candidates that are very close to our branch, to see how we can get them into office, but also how we can organize the working class in the process. And I'm going to exit my screen and pass things back over to Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Ansley, and to both of our speakers. We are going to have, like I said at the beginning, about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So everybody, you can start germinating your questions and getting on stack. But first of all, Mia is just going to review a few of our just norms, community agreements to keep the discussion vibrant and respectful.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, Daniel and Ansley. A lot of you guys know the drill already, but just going to go over our community agreements, which is to understand that everyone's here to learn, assume good intentions when people ask questions, when giving answers, generally just being comradely. And then if you have a question, go ahead and put stack into the chat, and we will be moderating that. We'll call on you to ask your question. We can do whatever the speakers prefer, whether it's one at a time or a couple of questions at a time. And try to be brief when you say your question so that we can do our breakout groups in a timely manner. So I'll go ahead and toss it over. I think, Carrington, is it you moderating the stack?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Okay, so Carrington will take it away to moderate the questions.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Daniel and Ansley, for great presentations. We have about 15, 20 minutes for conversation. Let's start with Shanti, followed by Nico.
Hi, thank you. Readings were great, especially the Abbott and Gustella. Very, very useful. This is my first time in working with the DSA electoral and BUM, and I'm just trying to see what's going to happen with these city council races. It's what we're all interested in. You know, we have so many people running, and one of the things that's driving me mad is more than one DSA members are running for the same seat. There's no coordination. They don't talk to each other. They're not even friendly with each other. They don't even really seem to understand the way that the new voting system might change and affect coalition building for progressives and all these kinds of things. But my general question for the group is, I think there's a big difference by just letting people declare if they're going to run on the DSA ticket, and DSA choosing our candidates and holding them to the program first. And I'm wondering why we don't do more of that, and what your experience is, particularly in Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn and Queens, where you've had successful DSA races.
That is a really, really well thought out question that I appreciate a lot. So I think that there's a couple things. You talked about DSA members running for the same seat and not seeming to be in conversation with one another. And that can be really confusing. We've had that in other races too, right? In New York 12, for example, which is the Carolyn Maloney's district. It covers like the Upper East Side. It's the richest congressional district in the country. There were two people there who were calling themselves socialists. I guess you could sort of count three if you included Suraj Patel in that. And they were all running, and nobody decided to drop out of the race. I see Honda, cutting his neck about Suraj Patel, because I don't think he was a socialist either. But you have all of these people who were like on the left, right? But I think that there's a real question of, what does that commitment mean if it's in an unorganized way? What does it mean to be a DSA candidate if you don't believe in the mass organization to put you into office? Like, what does it mean and it's like a question that I don't mean like in ill will to any comrades, but something to really consider. Like, is there an unorganized socialist, and why does that ego have to supersede the mass organization in building that? I also think that as far as like selecting members, that's really smart. We would love, I will use I statements here. I personally would really love if we could move as DSA toward a place where people are not seeking our endorsement, but instead our organization is really this multiracial working class organization that's so big and so powerful that we are able to select the people that we want to run. And as a sacrifice, they do that because being a candidate, being an elected is very difficult and very hard. And they do that as a sacrifice to the movement. We're not quite there yet, though I will say we do have some success stories where we were able to find people either within DSA or within groups that we're really closely aligned with. And the ways that we do that is really by building in our communities and working to continue to build DSA. So 2 examples of that. In Brooklyn, Jabari Brisport, rank and file union teacher, who is a longtime member of DSA, who we were able to run, and he was able to win his election, and people know and trust him. They've worked with him for a long time. Somebody that wasn't in DSA, though, is Farah Stufrant Forrest, who I'm seeing in the chat. And Farah is a tenant organizer, right? So we found her through Crown Heights Tenants Union, and we're like, Crown Heights Tenants Union, the work that you've been doing is very similar to our work, and like we want these housing activists to be fighting alongside us. And we developed Farah to the place that she felt comfortable to run, because she originally, like, that wasn't her intention. It was more of an idea, and we worked with her for a long time. So I would say that we need to just work with people and build our organization to get there, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Thanks, Ansley. Miko?
Thank you. My question is mostly for Daniel, but I think Ansley could answer as well. I'm glad Ansley did bring up the issue of big egos. So someone in Dan's branch in Nomad called Patrick Boblin recently released an article critical of the endorsement process. And these 2 key issues that he was worried about was the fact that DSA does not consider doing cross-class collaboration elections. So should socialists consider working with middle-class constituents? Like, is our goal just to focus on the working class? And if so, why is cross-class a bad idea? And the second issue was that he wasn't really comfortable with the having the candidate to support Bernie Sanders or be self-identifying socialist. He definitely was not comfortable with that. So as socialists, why should we care about the working class, and why should identifying as a socialist be a minimum in your opinion?
Sorry, could you repeat that second question again? I think it lagged out a little bit there for me.
Yeah, why should socialists support a working class campaign? And what's the second point? Why should identifying as a socialist be something to be considered when endorsing someone?
Sorry, could you say the last sentence one more time? Why should something socialist be?
Why should identifying as a socialist be important? Like, why should calling yourself a socialist or looking at yourself as fighting for socialist policies be a minimum?
Gotcha, thank you. So yeah, I guess like so on the first question about cross-class, a lot of that depends on your definition of class. Again, I would suggest looking at Jared and or Dustin's piece on this, where they do a small part where they try to define, like, I think in the best terms I've seen so far, the division between working class and professional managerial class, PMC. That I think it was helpful. I guess I ultimately reject the idea of like cross-class coalition if we're talking about, capitalists and labor, because it's just not going to happen, right? It's just, we have opposed interests. This is the fundamental difference between liberals and socialists. Liberals think that, we have problems in society and everyone can get on board and help solve the problem together. Socialists think that society is founded on this fundamental contradiction of contradictory interests. So, and yeah, for that reason, I don't think we can work with capitalists. I think the question of like the middle class is like a little more tenuous, and I think you have to get a little more specific. Like, I think something like Medicare for all, even like, people who I think are like, let's say like, upper middle class, they make 6 figures and stuff like that. I think a lot of them probably also have an interest in Medicare for all, for example, in that, because like, medical costs are so damn expensive. Even if you make that much money, like you might not be able to pay the bills. And also, I think in this situation too, there's a chance that a lot of employers, I think they oppose it now, but I think there's a chance that, with enough militancy, like the same way we saw some capitalists in the New Deal go on and support the New Deal, I think some employers will ultimately support Medicare for all because they pay a lot of money in health insurance for their employees. So, I mean, the question of cross-class alliance, I think is a little open. I think a lot of times depends on the specific goal, the specific demand you have on the table. And the second question is, identifying as a socialist. I think the supporting Bernie, I personally put that really high because, again, going back to the article that Dustin and Jared wrote, so much of politics today, party politics, is centered around the presidential race and presidential candidates. And, Bernie really, I'm not saying this about him as an individual, but, what Bernie did is representative of this entire resurgence of the left, the first time in 40 years that the left has really existed at all, again, in the United States. So I think, being a Bernie supporter is really important because you recognize that, this is, frankly speaking, this is like a world historical change that we witness here, and a drastic change in the in U.S. politics right now. And I think if you don't understand that this is the movement that's happening right now, and you don't get on board, then that's a problem. I will say personally, I don't actually think identifying as a socialist is that important. This is probably a controversial question, but I personally just don't think it's that important. I think especially as a country that's kind of gone through the Cold War and there's a lot of stink on the name, I really do think the most important thing is our platform, our policy, our political program. Especially when I was in New Hampshire talking to some people who really love Bernie's policies, but were hesitant about the label. I think overall, yeah, we should identify as socialists. I think most of our candidates should identify as socialists, but I personally don't put a ton of stock on that.
Thanks, Daniel. I think Ansley has a couple words to say as well, and then Jeremy's on stack.
Yeah, I really appreciate this question too. I think for the idea of if people should identify as socialists, I have a slightly different view than Dan. And it's good that DSA is a big tent organization to be able to hold all of these lines of political thought. But I think it's really important that our elected leaders identify as socialists if we are putting our labor into their campaigns and if we hope to trust them to build our movement. That trust is I think really critical. And if we have the goal of building DSA, not just improving people's material conditions, and I'm not just interested in electing a progressive because I think that other groups can do that, but I don't see it as the place where our labor is the most valuable. I do think that there are pieces of strategy though that go into that, of thinking maybe somebody is a candidate who used to be a small business owner and had a little restaurant and then became a teacher later on, and how do we deal with those differences in what we would consider these professions that are maybe in conflict, right? Like being a small business owner beforehand, obviously you are not this huge manager of other people, but it's still not the same kind of candidate that we would traditionally go for. But if it were strategic for how we wanted to build, those are sometimes just places where we're going to have to come to some compromises because of where our movement is at in this moment. But I think being a socialist is the bare minimum for candidates. I don't think every working class person has to say that because they're not there yet, but to wield power over other people's lives, it seems ridiculous to me that you wouldn't align with our politics. And then I also want to just hit on the point of trust in this situation. If we are to trust candidates to be accountable to us, not just in the short term, but in the long term, I think that they need to be really proudly for our organization. I haven't read the article that you shared, but I will soon. I don't know exactly how I'll feel about it, but I'm happy to talk about it over Slack or something later.
Thanks, Ansley. Jeremy, and then I put myself on set.
Yeah, thanks to you both. I had a couple of questions. So I liked, Ansley, in your presentation, you emphasized, and this is something that came up, I know, in the Guastella and Abbott article, like this issue about, how do we move, like so much about socialist electoral strategy has to be about expanding the electorate and kind of moving apathetic or disengaged working class, bringing disengaged, apathetic working class people back into the political system, because for good reason, a lot of working class people do not participate in the political system because they think it's a rigged game, as I think that was in the Capitalism in the State pamphlet. So I guess, on the other hand, though, that seems like very difficult, and it actually seems like broadly, say, our victories in New York have not been necessarily through like lots and lots and lots of registering new voters. It's instead been something like offering people an alternative and being able to pull out enough voters that our kind of pathetic, desiccated democratic machine can be defeated. So I wonder about kind of like sort of how we've done so far and the bigger goal of like bringing masses of new working class voters into the system, kind of how we see the step from A to B. So that was my one question. And then the other question, and this is to Dan or Ansley really, is, the National Electoral Strategy document that we had as one of the readings today emphasized the importance of local elections, local struggles in building electoral capacity and in building DSA's capacity. And that makes a lot of sense to me for a number of reasons. And I think it's definitely what we're doing in New York, although in New York it's even complicated because we have been focused much on the state level. But I do wonder about, so many of our biggest demands, like Medicare for All or Green New Deal, are only possible on a congressional level. So I wonder about like what you guys see as our relationship with organizations like Justice Dems, say, who have a more congressional focus, whereas our success has been more on a state level.
I guess I can go first on that. So yeah, I mean, I think on that second question, I totally agree. In my opinion, I really do think that like we as DSA, Justice Dems, and and our revolution, all these kinds of groups, really need to like coalesce together and start working together like much more. I think as a united front, as well as with like unions that I think that are friendly with us. Like rank and file caucuses that are really strong, like TDU and more. Because the way things are going, DSA has had some really exciting wins, but we're still like kind of a dot on the map. You know what I mean? Like where we are right now is still coming from an incredibly weak place, and I think building power is going to require us to work together on that kind of coalitional level, especially because we very uniquely are a left that's literally dealing with existential ticking time bomb, climate change, right? So like the long like 100-year strategy is unfortunately not an option for us. And stuff. I guess I'm a little mixed on the congressional stuff about what that means. Like, I think in some ways maybe you can conceive of it as a division of labor. Justice Dems focus on congressional, we don't. But at the end of the day, I think I think there's a lot to be learned about the congressional, or there's a lot. Maybe we should be putting more focus on the congressional stuff because, when you think about like the fundamentals of what I said about the structural bias of the state towards cap, a lot of it has to just do with budgets, right? A lot of it has to do with the fiscal capacity, like how much money the state can spend, right? Because all of the stuff we want is really damn expensive. And at the end of the day, because of the way local governments work, like really the federal government is, for a lot of our demands, the only one that has the kind of budgetary capacity, just like the real cash, to really, pass what we want. So I definitely do think that this is something that we should keep in mind looking forward. And one of the reasons I think we really need to stand with Justice Dems and map out a real serious federal strategy is precisely because the Green New Deal and Medicare for All are I personally think are really going to be very, very expensive and require like federal level funding. They're going to require going into a lot of debt for the federal government, and that's something that we can't really do on the state or the city level.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dan, and I feel the same kinds of conflicts about getting involved in congressional races, more so because I think of the work that goes into campaigns and the devastation that happens if you lose. Winning isn't our only goal, but I don't know that DSA is in a strong enough place that losing a lot of elections is going to bode super well for us. And so I think that there are places where we also have to be really strategic to think of where we want to go. Congressional races are much, much harder to win in terms of money and labor than state races are. And so it's that kind of trade-off that like we can't do like at this point that we're at, we realistically cannot do 4 state races and a congressional race. It is just impossible. We will lose something, and we have to decide where to cut our losses. But I'm looking forward to having those conversations in the future of what we do and how we see building power. As far as your first question, Jeremy, I do think that we can see that our victories in New York have organized working people, but maybe in a slightly different way than we would expect. We are seeing more people have joined DSA. I can't give you exact numbers for electoral work because as we were winning elections, there was also a mass uprising, for people flooding the streets fighting for racial justice. So through both of those things, there was a lot of enthusiasm to get organized through DSA, but I don't know where it came from or if it was both of those things together. My guess is that it was many things at once, and then the end of the Bernie campaign and all of these things kind of coalescing. But we definitely have more new people in DSA than we have before. We're in the middle of a huge recruitment drive to have 100,000 members nationwide, and we'll drop the links in that, I'm sure, in the chat for that at some point. So all of that is really exciting. But I think that there are a couple other things that we have to think about when we're thinking of organizing working class people. Part of it is this like linear idea, people join our organization. The other part of it that's a little tricky is that people are telling us that they voted for the candidate. So we have, recorded that data. We're like, okay, we've got, all of these socialist supporters in Bushwick who supported Julia Salazar in 2018 or this year in 2020. And we can see that through our campaign data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're organized yet. And so those are the things that maybe they haven't joined DSA, but they're like on their way, that the next time that you talk to your neighbor in your building to organize them around housing action, or the next time that you are talking with the guys at your bodega about how hard it is for them to pay for their kids' college, like then by that time, then they're like more ready and willing to become organized socialists. And like that piece of it, I am like, it's working, but I can't tell you exactly like the numbers for it as much. I think it's like more so a thing of all of our members who have talked to these people are like, when I talk to people and I say Julia Salazar, like they know what socialism is now, and they didn't, a year ago, or they didn't 2 years ago. And that is really exciting to see. And I hope that through city council, we'll continue to be able to build that, especially as like city council has like much less power over redistributing wealth, but they have a huge ability and responsibility, I think, to be that bully pulpit for socialism. So hopefully we'll see a lot more people who are like excited about these candidates and then get organized afterward.
Thanks both so much. So we want to move on to breakout groups, but I just have one question. which is for city council. That's the next election upon us, I think. And I just wonder if you could briefly say what our strategy is and what sort of impact, like us getting, say, I don't know how many candidates we have, maybe 4 or 5 maybe in Brooklyn or across the city, and what sort of impact we could hope for from that. And that's for either Dan or Ansley.
In the interest of being quick, I think that our strategy for city council is going to be focused on, one, being a bully pulpit for socialism and organizing the working class, because we see less power in budgets. But given that, still looking to defund the NYPD and having socialists really pressure other council members for that. We don't know exactly how big our slate will be and what kind of ability they will have to make that happen, but that is definitely a goal. And then I also think that having safe schools that are equitably funded, but are also safe in terms of public health and COVID, I think that's going to be really huge too. But Dan, you may be able to answer this as well.
Yeah, I think that's mostly right. The one thing I want to add is that, the interesting thing about city council is, their fiscal capacities, their budgetary capacities are extremely limited. But in many ways, they're like kind of more similar, like legislators in their district rather than just being, executives in their district rather than they are to being just like legislators on a city body. And one of the most important powers that city council has is land use, determining what land is used for, and very, very importantly in that, rezoning, like basically determining how high buildings can go, and whether or not then, therefore, like whether or not real estate developers think that somewhere is a attractive investment. So, one thing I guess I'll add to the city council discussion is, really looking into like the specificities. I think the specificities of the district themselves become more important for city council than they have been in like state or federal races. And, really like important land use battles, I think, are something to kind of think about when, making decisions on city council endorsement.
Amazing. Thanks, you guys. All right, so we're going to go into breakout groups now, where we'll be discussing what we heard tonight and also what we read. And then we're going to reconvene here after 30 minutes, and maybe everyone can bring back something that their group discussed that was noteworthy, and then we'll have some announcements and call it a night. Mia, are you good to go on breakouts?
Yep, the breakouts are ready. For those of you who are facilitating the groups, I dropped the questions in the chat, so just go ahead and copy and paste those for yourselves if you don't have them in the document. And yeah, I'll start opening up the groups now. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Jeremy, do you want to lead this section?
Sure. Sorry. Yes, that's right. My job. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So we're just going to do a brief round of report backs. Just to, if you can summarize the main points that you cover in your conversation so we can all share and kind of synthesize the learning. So let's start with breakout group 1. I don't know who was in what, so you'll have to tell me. So breakout group 1.
I think that's me. Hi, so breakout group 1 did not get to go through all the questions, but we had some really good discussions. While talking about, I think the first or second question, we ended up getting into this question of what Vivek Chibber said in the ABCs of Capitalism, that like holding power in the state as an elected official doesn't always guarantee power politically, because of the fact that we are like functioning this electoral power under capitalism. We spent a while just kind of like grappling with that tension and how it is still worthwhile to do electoral campaigns. And then we spent some time talking about socialists facing pushback from external capital and capitalists and establishment politics. And I think we ultimately concluded in the fact that we need this collective power, and thus like the collective power of having a membership organization, having our own party, having multiple socialists elected, and using that power to as like bases to organize around other issues like labor and healthcare and housing, and how that really like helps us. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
Awesome, thank you, Carly. Breakout group number 2.
I'm happy to report on breakout group 2's behalf. We had a really wonderful discussion that I think our conversation of party got cut much too short, but really grappling with what a party is and what it's devolved into versus what we hope it would be. I think that we also had some good conversation surrounding how socialists in office are able to organize in the Northeast versus in maybe more conservative communities in the South, and really talking about what accountability is and what that looks like. And I think that's an ongoing conversation that the left needs to be having as we elect more people into office. But thinking, I think Chris brought up a really good point about how sometimes on the left we are quick to call people out, but that doesn't necessarily build our organization. And so what is our goal in that? And I think that those are things that I hope that we can continue to have in conversations, both in poly-ed, but also maybe in our branch too.
I love that. All great. It's so interesting also the different points that grab different groups' attention. So breakout group number 3.
Hey, I'm Kevin White, representing group 3 here. Yeah, I think we had a few questions here that we had good points on. What can socialists in office do when they face pushback from capital? We talked about how socialists can be more like a people-powered movement. Socialists can use data based on that, how popular these programs are. So I think there's a lot to advocate for that instead of maybe costs of these programs. How might they differ from ordinary campaigns? The topic of mutual aid came up, and sort of like these cross related movements and things, and just getting into a group coalition, I think, around campaigns. And I think all these things help. Socialists can be more community-based, more people-powered, rather than soliciting with donors in background rooms and stuff like that. So yeah, the last question about the political parties in America and not being part of the working class. I think it's we had discussed, it's just from sort of years of politicians getting lobbied by companies, and I think these corporations have made it a pretty, the two-party system, pretty low risk for themselves. So I think the recent movements of Bernie and just DSA prove that maybe more of a people-powered solution might be our answer to socialism in the USA. So
cool.
That's
Thanks, Kevin. Breakout group 4 was my group. I think Rahel is going to report.
Cool, thanks. So we started out with a little, kind of go around about, feelings towards the sort of general election and what DSA's as an organization posture was around that. But I won't bore you with that right now. We'll go into the facilitated questions, which we tried to go through them as much as possible. To the earlier questions about how socialists should think about democracy, especially as it relates to the way that capitalists influence democracy, although the main mechanism for control is their wealth and money. They obviously use various avenues to direct that money. So there's the media, there's think tanks, there's various associations, and the socialist job is to figure out a way to counter them. And like, it can't be with money, it has to be with a close working class organization, which is able to either funnel information to or sort of be the alternate instruments and alternate avenues for education and propaganda against all the moneyed interest, all the ways that capitalists use their money. When it comes to how socialists would behave in elections, a big thing that came up was, or how electeds would behave when they're in office. And one of those key tools would be transparency, and not just in the sort of more clear ways that you would be transparent around donation sources, but also in demystifying the process of how reforms and policy changes happen. But the corollary to that is that you need a strong organization or organization or working class group of people who can point this out in a way that's productive and also move and provide further instruction or policy or propaganda for that elected to be able to move those reforms ahead. And the way that socialists behave in elections is different, and it's because we emphasize the movement. I think we saw that with Bernie all the time, where he would never want to talk about his background or bring that kind of stuff up. He always wanted to be about the policies, about what was going to help the working class. And so that's one way that I think was really made clear and has been made clear to a lot of people as we're moving through and trying to make change. Check.
Thank you, Rahel. Group number 5.
Hey, I'm Jared with group number 5. We had a chance to talk through all of the questions, so we had quite a breadth of discussion. But some of the highlights were around electoral campaigns. I think it was interesting. We talked through what's the different funding structure between a socialist campaign and a non-socialist campaign, as well as what's the volunteer force look like. With the socialist campaign, you might have a more permanent mobilized force versus another campaign which might be spun up for that campaign. Then we also talked about the main ways that capitalists influence government decisions, from capital flight to things like lobbying, which are maybe more obvious and more direct imposition. And then lastly, we kind of talked about the pushbacks that socialists in office might face from capital. And it was interesting just to talk through what are the different forms that can take, whether it's your opposition being funded through capitalists, or maybe something that's less overt, like being excluded from a committee. And so we just kind of thought of what are the ways that you can combat that, whether it's building funding from your own organizations or coalition building, and just what are the ways that you would kind of approach that pushback.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. And last but not least, group number 6.
Hey, Stephen from Group 6. So we spent a good portion of our time discussing the importance of being involved in many races, specifically around the city council, to really localize our politics effectively, and had a pretty lively discussion about, the balancing, effectively using our resources versus how much that's going to bring neighbors in. And that kind of revolved also around the importance of immediacy in politics. So the things like mutual aid, solidarity with tenants, workers, and direct action, and just how important that is for our organization. And as far as the questions, the main one that we revolved around was the second one, and just talking about capital pushback, capital flight. One of the people in our discussion brought a couple examples of nationalizing in other nations, how they did that to combat capital strikes, and then also just kind of talked about the boundaries of electoralism and the importance of having DSA as an organization that isn't exclusively involved in that electoralism and has a really active member-based organization.
Cool. Thank you so much, Stephen. Yeah, what a rich discussion. Really appreciate everybody who came out tonight. I have a few announcements to share, and then we can all go on our ways. So first of all, you might know DSA is in the middle of a recruitment drive. So Ansley mentioned, I think, earlier. So if you are not yet a member, please join. Carrington is putting the link in the chat. If you are a member, our goal is that every member recruit 3 other people. I myself only have recruited 1 person yet, but it's my sister. So I feel like family recruitment, you should get like special points. But I'm working on it, and I really encourage everybody to just take a moment to think about, like, who in my life do I know who has these politics, basically, who is not a DSA member yet, because I actually came up with a pretty long list that way, and get them to join because they pay dues, allows us to be more ambitious in our organizing. They are organizing alongside us. That means we can be more ambitious in the actions we plan and the campaigns we run, etc. So please participate. The link in the chat, it's like a New York specific link. So do use that. Second of all, I did want to emphasize again the Brooklyn Electoral Working Group joining up that Ansley had put in her presentation. We'll drop that in the chat again. If you're interested in doing more electoral work in Brooklyn, you please do get involved. It is Supremo. Next, I have on the list night school. Our next night school is in 2 weeks on Monday, October the 26th. It's on the labor movement, and it's with Jane McAlevey, who is one of our greatest speakers and thinkers on the labor movement today. Her books are like absolutely essential reading, no shortcuts especially, so we'll be reading part of that, and she'll be speaking, not to be missed. Tell your friends. Then I have an action ask this coming Saturday, October 17th. There's going to be defund tabling in Maria Hernandez. So if you're ready for some socialist activism after all this social organizing, come and talk to our neighbors in North Brooklyn about why we need to divest from the police and invest in our communities. There's just a couple other dates to put on your calendars. The next North Brooklyn DSA meeting, membership meeting, is Wednesday, October the 28th at 7 p.m. And we're having a socially distanced post-Halloween hangover / free candy social on November the 1st from 3 to 5 in person. And then finally, I know someone from Lowman Polyed wanted to just talk about something they have coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. I'm Robin. I'm the newly elected co-chair of Lower Manhattan Political Education. And I just wanted to announce that we have a capital reading group that we're starting. And the first meeting is actually on Tuesday, the 20th. So not tomorrow, but next week. A really good group of people in our working group has been organizing it, so we're really excited about it. The first session is going to be on wage, labor, and capital, a shorter pamphlet written by Karl Marx. And then after 2 weeks later, we'll be delving into capital itself, starting with volume 1, of course. So I'm going to drop the link in to the chat for our action network. And yeah, I mean, if capital is something that you've been wanting to tackle, or if you're really well seasoned in Marx and just want to engage with our group, we'd be really happy to have you. So thank you again, guys.
Thanks, Robin. Anyone else have a quick announcement they want to share? All right, then I'm gonna say thank you so much, comrades. Solidarity forever. It's really hard to sing over Zoom. Otherwise, I suggest we all start singing it. But thank you, and see you at the next night school. Take care. Have a good night. Oh, and thank you, Daniel and Ansley, again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye out, Solidarity. See you in a couple weeks, if not sooner.